Hello, folks. This is Jay with Behind the Grind, the Professional GM Chronicles. Just want to welcome you guys here today. We have with us Jacob from Start Playing Games, who is a professional game master. He's taking some time out of his busy schedule, and I know it's a busy schedule, to visit with us to talk a little bit about some insights, tips, and tips of the trades, tricks of the trades, and things of the sort that he can help for other aspiring GMs that want to get into this professionally. It's also a great tool for people to be able to just pick up different ways to be able to improve their game mastering by listening to the guys who are doing this for a living. So, if you like this type of material, folks, make sure you cast the triple boon and like, share, and subscribe to this quest. So, Jacob, thank you so much for visiting with us today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Excellent. Hey, if you don't mind, just take a little bit of time and stuff to talk about you. What got you into this thing?
Yeah, so I was so my I started playing D&D when I was like 18 or so.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I started DMing when I was like 20. And I was so terrible at it that the first time I DM'd, we got halfway through and then my players went, "This isn't fun. We're not going to finish this. You can try again some other time." Um, and I got vindictive and I dedicated the next years until I became effectively the group GM. I we would I was I mean it would this would have been probably like a decade and a half, somewhere around like a decade-ish ago, and it was all of my friends were super into the games, and we would take turns trading off systems and all this kind of stuff. So I got to learn a bunch, got to play a bunch of different games, and then eventually I was at the time working in I worked in politics for a while, doing organizing, being a field director for a couple different size races, and I needed a job in between campaigns because that's a seasonal work.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled across Start Playing, and purely by accident, it turned into my full-time gig. I just thought it'd be a fun side thing that I could do while I was killing myself on campaigns, and I got very lucky, and it turned into my main and only job. And I was taking time off from this to work on campaigns until I eventually realized I didn't need to anymore.
Well, okay, it sounds like your first experience mirrors mine. I remember my players just stopping, saying, "We quit. This is not fun." And we were running a game called Paranoia, where characters die all the time, and I was like, "This is gonna be fun. I can kill my guys all." Wasn't fun.
I did Doctor Who. Doctor Who was my first game that I ran, and I made the horrible mistake of trying to make it exactly like the show, which is really just you walk down hallways and talk a bunch. And that's not actually fun to roleplay. Nobody wants to just have conversations in hallways. No one wants me to explain the world to them as they're just like asking me questions. That's not a good game. And somewhere around the fifth hallway, they were just like, "No, I'm good. I'm done."
We're done. We want to do something else. Totally understand that one. Okay, so talk to me about your most memorable campaign with well over 1,000 games that you've hosted on Start Playing Games. I know that you've got a chance to be able to. You've got a vast array of experiences, but what campaign has been the most memorable to you? What made it stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I actually just broke 1,700 like 2 weeks
Oh
ago.
my god!
Yeah, which is only professional games, which is wild to think about. I would say the most memorable campaign of mine, I ran. I Part of me really loves. I've gone back and reran Doctor Who now, knowing how to DM, and that was the most fun I've probably had singularly running any game. Just because A, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and B, there's something really gratifying in the structure of having to do very, very episodic sessions while still having overarching narrative and having to balance those out. I'm very, all of my stuff is home built if I can help it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that setting, having to constantly have a new thing that you purely built yourself and then trusting that it'll launch into the other stuff and making all of that intertwine nicely, deeply satisfying, deeply fun, and trying to build it to their understanding of Doctor Who as well as my understanding was a deeply, deeply fun thing. So it had everything from laser sharks to weird chocolatiers and all that kind of good stuff. It's funny because I just said that I prefer doing original material, but I'm almost completed Horror on the Orient Express, the Call of Cthulhu mega campaign, which is I adore. I think it's the best written campaign just period. I think it's amazing. But I had a point in the campaign. It's my favorite I've probably run that's that length. And you have in the middle of it, the players separated, completely went to different countries separated. Like they are not together at all. And I had to figure out how to make it so the tension of the session still amped up throughout it while having them on completely different mysteries and narratives and at different places in those mystery and narratives. I had to start the session where they were really doing it to that degree of separation with a warning of like, I don't know if what I'm about to do is going to work. I think it will, but if it doesn't, I'll reimburse you. If this is not fun for us. But by the end, I was making the act of jumping between the groups into a jump scare. So they were truly jumping in their seats. Like, no, don't come back to me. Go back to them. Like, I don't want you on me right now. As like one person's trying to get through like a field of roses that are underneath a building, and the others are trying to avoid brown shirts in Italy, and it's just this delightful, weird mesh of stuff.
Very cool. With these games that you running them as you do, have you ever failed? Have you ever had one of these games go off the rails? And if so, how'd you salvage it?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally I have stuff go off the rails. I'm very low prep intentionally. My big thing is how do I make your choices have the biggest impact on the world. Much more, I think the plot fundamentally in these kind of settings is really just like world accurate consequences to you making choices. That's all plot functionally is. As long as you have an impact on the world and it is thematically accurate to what we're doing, there will be plot. I'm not worried as much about it. The biggest issues I've ever run into from a keeping things like on or off rails is making sure that people are engaging with it. The people that I struggle the most with are not people who are making big choices and weird choices and having to finagle it. I often struggle with the people who want to play the games more like a video game, where it is go from point A to point B, find the thing, talk to the 3 NPCs, go fight the boss. And when you're not engaging in the world is where my stuff really struggles. Just because of how I like to do it. I generally, my workaround is to normally try to constantly make it clear that the more choices you make and rewarding weird choices that they make, the small choices impact the world. You casually mentioned beginning the session that your character likes spaghetti. You will find a spaghetti shop by the end of the session. And the fact that you have that kind of input and power in the world, people generally will realize and grab onto to some degree. That's normally my workaround. Once people realize they have agency, they generally take it a lot more seriously. Or not seriously, but they know how to interact in my games, if that makes sense.
So I think it's that many of the games you run are campaign like. You don't run a whole lot of one shots.
I do some one shots. I like one shots a lot. I don't do a lot of one shots purely from a financial perspective.
Okay.
Because the turnover rate is much higher for one shots. So you have to be constantly recruiting, which I don't want to be doing. It's just I want to know games are happening and what days they are happening and all that kind of stuff. So my preference is always towards campaigns because and it's purely financial at the end of the day. Is I know if I'm doing a big campaign, I've got 6 people every day at this time, and I can do these many sessions on this many days, and that is all locked in instead of there being doubt there. I'll occasionally do one shots. I have a one shot on this Friday I'm doing that's Spirit of 77. But I'll do them around holidays. I have whenever Thanksgiving rolls around, I always do a session called In Space No One Can Hear You Gobble, where you have to fight government enhanced turkeys. But yeah, it is much more campaign oriented. But mostly out of a financial thing. If I could do it how I prefer, I'd probably be doing short 10 session campaigns just for myself. That would be my dream world at the end of the day.
Got it. Very cool. What inspires your approach to game mastering? And when you first started, did you have any role models?
Well, when I started playing was pre the celebrity boom of all this. So I'm honestly so jealous of young people who get to watch all these things before they start. Because like when I was starting, it was all people, you only knew what was good by how your friends reacted. So if you were bad from your friend group, and you had to figure out what the thing was that made the three people who were willing to play with you not enjoy themselves. I really enjoyed doing it and trying to figure that out. And the thing that really defined my GMing style is I was okay at it. I was doing well. I was doing fine from like friends. And then I had a session where I had spent somewhere around like 5 to 6 hours prepping this experience where it was a game of Mutants and Masterminds 2E, which for those who haven't played it is a superhero game that's amazing. I love it. Very, very crunchy, but if you played in a certain era, you love crunch. You'll never give up crunch. Um, the game, so they had to get this box off of this villain run subway cart that was going to go down into the water, and you'd end up in the sewers, and you have to all these yada yada yada. There's going to be the whole session, and they would end with them finding their entrance to the sewer, and they'd have this whole dungeon to run. Player solved it in 5 minutes. Immediately, one was just like, I have a pocket dimension, and I just walk up and pocket dimension it out, and I had to just go, shit, yeah, yeah, you can. And I was so angry. I was just like, I didn't know what to do because I needed to fill 3 hours. Everybody came over. They brought snacks. You have to fill the time. I was just like, the devil shows up, because I couldn't think of anything else. And that was like a 3-session arc that was way more fun than anything I had prepped. That was such a delight. And everybody was so invested in that because you could see the realization that we had made a choice. It broke something in the world, and the world responded to us breaking it. So my goal became to do that, to see how far can I remove my planning, my preparing, how far can I do that to make it so you, the player, are always the one pushing the world forward. I am just making sure that your choice matters. I am just making sure you have consequence. And it was a lot of fun. And slowly I got to the point where before I started doing it professionally, I actually did test for myself, where I was like, I need to be able to do these things because if I'm going to ask people to pay me, I need to be good enough to do certain things. So I wanted to be able to, the big one I remember is I want to be able to fully improvise a mystery without knowing what the mystery is at the start, and have the players at the end ask me what module was I using. And I did it. I was able to do that. And it was just like, oh, if I can do that, I can run a professional level game in my head. That's that kind of stuff. One of the others was, can I improvise a full dungeon that feels logical and makes sense? And that was another one where it's like, I was able to do that, and that was the stuff that finally pushed me into doing it professionally. Is if I can do these things in the way that I like to run games, then I don't feel too bad asking people to pay me to do it.
Well, 1,700 games under your belt, man, you must be doing something right. So rock
Hopefully,
on.
yeah. Hopefully.
All right, we're gonna change topics a little bit, and we're gonna talk about your
Yeah.
philosophy on game mastering. So, one of the first questions is, how do you balance narrative storytelling with player agency?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think I think people some DMs need a lot of prep work, and that's totally fine. That's their own. You do what you need to do. For me personally, I like the idea that if the player is the main characters, or the players are the main characters, then everything they do matters. Everything they do is of importance. So whether it be big, small, whatever. So when I'm DMing, my priority is on making sure that every action has a thematically accurate consequence, and trying to tie all that in. Mostly, a lot of what I'll do when I prepare a game is I'm like, what world is it in? What's the kind of setting and tone of that world? And then what is the big thematic question that I'm trying to get at? That the players are exploring through all the different narratives and all that kind of stuff, and keeping that thematic cohesion. That keeps the thematic cohesion through it all. And as long as I focus on those elements, I have a beacon that I am following. I know exactly. I don't know what the road looks like, but I know where I'm going. I know I ran a D&D game for somewhere around 2.5 years on Start Playing, and they had and it was, high fantasy. Was the state was there? The players all had, traumatic backstories, and because of course they do, it's D&D. And then but my statement that I had was like, oh, you are. What does it? What is your? At what point does someone have to turn against their sense of in the grand sense of the father? At what point is revolt necessary? So every place they go to in some way engages with that idea. And we have, oh, you've started answering the question, which means as the game goes on, which means I now need to evolve the question based on what your answers are. And you're constantly feeding me the information I need. So it never feels stagnant. It never feels boring. It never feels like I'm just spinning wheels. It always is immediately responsive to what you've done.
Okay. Cool. So, with all these games that you've had on your belt, have you ever been in a situation where you've had to deal with somebody that's disruptive or belligerent or something along the lines? And if so, how did you handle it?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't have it. I've gotten lucky with that. I don't know how, but I have gotten very lucky. I have a general. I've had a cup. Occasionally, I'll have, somebody will be, a little too high or a little too drunk, and that's a lot of just like taking them aside more than anything else. Because a lot of times I don't, I always do my best to assume, you know, ignorance and maliciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like odds are you had just like one too many beers before you got here, or you smoked too much of your joint before you started playing. Everybody who's ever played a tabletop game has made that mistake before. I get it. And kind of just making sure they're aware, and it's like I'm whatever. That it's just a lot of like open communication. I've had some people who just won't show up on time, and that is a little bit more disruptive for me because you can't, especially in D&D where combats have to be balanced. If somebody shows up 45 minutes into a combat and they're perfectly healed and the rest of the party's been beaten the hell up, well, like, you broke the combat by showing up late. Um, there was one player I had to kick because he kept doing it, and I was just like, you're ruining the core function of this game, which is that combat there. It's not fair to the other players that the tank shows up and then just auto kills the boss because he has all this stuff that everybody else has spent to get him to a place where this can happen. So that I just, once again, it's just a matter of communication. The only time I've been aggressive once or twice, and it's always when someone's like being a bigot. That's the point where I'm like, absolutely not. There is no you are not, accidentally using a word you didn't know was offensive. You are like luxuriating in being in a space where you think I'm not going to call you out for being, racist or a transphobe or whatever the hell. Absolutely not. Get the hell out. I'll take whatever consequence. I'll give you your money back. I don't really want your money. Leave. And I've had a couple times like that where I've done that, and thankfully other players either stuck around or played in other games of mine, because they immediately were also clear that, oh, I'm not gonna be nice about this. Like, I understand some people can't wake up early, excuse me. That's fine. I get it. We can have a conversation about that. I'm not gonna have a conversation where you're telling players where you're making jokes that make it so my players are fundamentally unsafe. Like, that's not happening.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of figured that you'd run into some issues like that, especially being around as long as you had. So that's some good insight on how to handle things. Um, do you think a game master should prioritize the story, the rules, or the player's enjoyment, and why?
Oh, interesting. What I think, I guess the order of operations in my head is, I think you should have a thorough understanding of the rules, so you understand what the system is trying to do. Because I think player enjoyment is, while you're playing, the most important thing. But from a DM perspective, you need to understand both what the rules mechanically do and what the intention of those rules are. Like with D&D, we can all day try to turn it into a million different things, but fundamentally D&D is about, I would say, like a 70-30 mix, with 70% being combat and 30% being like role play.
Okay.
It is most of the mechanics in it are based around combat, so you have to make sure that you're balancing all of that out and knowing how to make it so the narrative, whatever, is feeding into the pieces of the game. But if you're running, I run Monster of the Week. Monster of the Week is all investigative. That's all that game is. So if I were to have the same ratio of combat and stuff in the game, I'd break and ruin that game. You lean into the point of what the game is trying to do so that you can maximize player engagement, players having fun, to the most with the thing that it's trying to do. Trying to make sure that that's matched as much as possible, I think, is where you get the most from. And I think narrative kind of comes out of that. If you know that your game is investigative, which is my favorite kind of game to run at the end of the day, if you know that a game is investigative, you will lean heavier into the mysteries and the clues and all that kind of stuff. And that will organically create plot out of it. That will create the narrative, is how do you solve this? How do they, piece all this together? But if you know the game's more combat oriented, or the game's more social oriented or goofy oriented, if you can match accordingly, and it'll create that player enjoyment.
Okay. Nice. So when you talked about your player engagement and stuff like that, how do you create a sense of immersion for your games? What kind of tricks do you use for that?
I'm very low tech compared to a lot of people on Start Playing.
Okay.
I don't use like a fancy VTT if I can help it. I use Owlbear Rodeo, which is, intent for years didn't require a login, which is why I used it, because I wanted you to be able to jump in as quick as possible. I want minimum tech requirements. So like I use Discord, and then Owlbear if I have to.
See, dude, that's exactly what I use right there, man. It works.
Yeah, it's great. I want it to feel like, when I think about what tabletop games are to me, I don't think of all this tech stuff. I've played in games that have the tech stuff, but I don't think about that. I think about, like, my first few games, we were all just broke as hell, where we couldn't afford new ink for our printer, so we had one printed out character sheet, and we're passing it around so we could fill out empty piece of printer paper with our stats on it. Like, that's what the game feels like at its truest sense to me, much more than a lot of the tech stuff, which to me, not to diminish anybody else's version of it, feels a lot like trying to emulate a video game. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I don't want this to be a video game. I want it to be 6 people around a table making shit up. That is the dream of this. So when I'm looking for immersion, a lot of the times I'm leaning much more on, like, describe, like, can you elaborate on what you're feeling? You said this would remind you of something. I want to know what that is, and forcing you to, like, live in those emotions and those beats. I want you to experience. I lean far more into experiencing the feelings of your characters more than trying to hide mechanics. I love, one of my favorite things to do in, like, horror games that really increases it is, if I'm playing in person, I will just, randomly roll dice. Like, I'll just roll dice, look at them and go, huh, and just don't worry, keep going. Or, like, just go, who here is feeling lucky, and have them roll dice for me. And they have no idea what they just rolled on, and it's always spooky. That is far spookier than any spooky music I could have given. All the players are just sitting around going, like, what the hell was that? We've got a 43. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Like, and that quiet stress and anxiety there, leaning into that place, I think creates a lot more what I would call, like, organic immersion, much more than trying to, like, trick you with, or not trick you. That sounds like I'm diminishing. It's just a different style. I'm much more black box, much more minimalist when it comes to a lot of that stuff, because that's the sincerity is what I'm going for. The truer, what I think is, like, the core of what these games are going for, much more than I am trying to create, this impression of a video game. I just want you to hear the words and get lost in it.
All right, this is that's really interesting. I can appreciate the focusing on the sense of immersion and stuff like that, trying to just create the sense of just a bunch of guys sitting around making up collective storytelling. That's really cool. Okay, so this is going to be the most controversial question you're going to run into.
Okay, yeah.
You ready for this?
Yeah, hit me with it.
There we go. What's your stance on fudging dice rolls? as a game master?
Oh, oh. I mean, I think it's fine. Uh, I, 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 I mean, yeah, I have no good. Yeah, I truly don't care. Like, I don't think as a player you should. I think as a player you should only ever do it to fail. To be clear, I think as a player you should not do it unless you are choosing the dramatic option of having like, unless you were narratively increasing stuff by choosing to have something go wrong instead of go right. That I don't care. That's with players. With GMs, like, yeah, of course. Like, I mean, like, it depends on the game exactly, the how much and how like where that line lies for me. But generally, if I'm playing a game and I roll in such a way where I one shot, D&D, I one shot a level 1 character who hasn't had a turn yet, that's a bad turn. That's a bad thing to happen. That shouldn't happen. It's not fun. It's not satisfying. But if I'm playing, Morkborg, I'm going to be a lot meaner about that, and I'm okay with that. If I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, I there are times where I just, I'll let them where I should be rolling. I'll just treat it like this degree of success and let them roll against it instead of doing it because that will prioritize them being able to actually have an impact much more over me getting the satisfaction of like beating them. Um, I think it really is system dependent to the degree. There's a lot of games around where I don't even roll dice half the time, where I don't have any dice that I'm rolling. I'm just letting them roll, and that dictates what's happening. And I like that a lot. If I was running older games, like games from the 70s, I'd probably be leaning a lot more into rolling dice and being, because there is a certain maliciousness to that relationship is combative. And I would lean more into that, but I don't think most games have that relationship anymore. And I don't think that should be the focus while you're running. The focus should be play experience much more than are my numbers 100% accurate. At least that's where I generally lie with it.
Okay, just the thought of having characters roll the monsters to hit on them just kind of reminds me of the quintessential grandmother telling the kid to go out and get a switch and bring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love doing that in Call of Cthulhu. It's so satisfying and it's so frightening for players when you go like, hey, yeah, so I'm just gonna let you know right now. It has a 120 in its stat. Yes, that's impossible. I don't care. You're going to need to roll a percentile check. You want it to be as high as you physically can get it. No, it cannot miss. Good luck. And just the players will argue about who's the person rolling and trying to pass it off to the other players. And it's like that. It's technically, above table talk or whatever. But more importantly, it is really sincere engagement with the game and with that moment. That is a dramatic moment that will hold much more than me rolling and going, at least in my mind, than me going, oh, it rolled and it got a critical success. Like, you got to get a critical success as well to avoid, and it's just nobody cares. Like that's stressful, but it's not the same degree. That like 30-second minute buildup of people arguing is just so integral in my mind to the experience of the game and making it so they're invested fully.
Very cool. All right, we're gonna switch again, and
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna be talking about crafting worlds and narratives. And specifically, it sounds like somebody with like you that can very much so create so much stuff on the fly. This ought to be really an interesting topic for people. So, how do you approach world building in your campaigns? Do you build it from the top down or the bottom up? Top down being you have a map in front of you or a big thing, and you're focusing on a given area of it, or do you focus on like just they're in a town, a city, or a certain location, and grow
Mm.
out from there?
So I believe in I pulled this from an interview from or like this initially came out of an interview from I believe it was Matt Mercer and Brandon Lee Mulligan talking, which is this idea of like thematic world building,
Okay.
where for my point of interest is because I'm not like a fantasy nerd at my core. I haven't actually read that much fantasy. I'm a lit nerd at my core. So I'm much less interested in the idea of like building worlds for the sake of worlds and much more in like thematic questions and engaging in like moral quandaries. Like I like the muck of stuff like that. So for me, a lot of it will be, what is the core of the world? What is that core central idea that interplays with the mechanics of the game really nicely? And then what does that mean the world has to have? If
Okay.
we're if we are doing I'm doing a cyberpunk game that's going to be starting in like 2-ish weeks, I want to say, somewhere around there. We have 2-ish weeks, and like in the system it is explicit. It's Otherscape. I'm not, if you've played it, amazing game, I love that core system. But Otherscape's thing is that there are gods have returned and there are cyberpunk happening. So when you with if those things are true, then I need to make sure that I know like what kind of I need a sense of that means cults have to exist and there needs to be this relationship between them, and what is that mess of things where the way religion and technology are intersecting to create like different factions and all that kind of stuff, and letting that kind of like organically grow from there. That I find really interesting and really fun, much more than anything else, and kind of letting it develop there. I also like, maybe this will make me sound lazy, I like giving the players a lot of agency over the world. So as part of session 0, I'll often be like, can you all give me one NPC in the world? Can you all give me one place in this world? Can you all give me one blank, whatever in this world? And then making it so we build the world that way.
Okay.
Because it makes it so I know, we've already kind of established what the setting of the place is. We're all already in agreement of that. But like, what's a rumor that your character would have heard about this place? And that instantly gives me, a world of tools to play with. That gives me so much, and it me lets me know what's important to them too. There's nothing worse, or at least there was no worse feeling for me when I was still doing it this way, of like designing a big thing and then having the players go the opposite direction. But the player just told me exactly what they want. They just told me they want a conspiracy theory with the hot dog seller. Well, thank you. I can totally have a whole gang of hot dog sellers that are secretly doing blank, 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 blank. Like, that's perfect. That gives it to me, and that lets me know, like, well, that means that these kind of things have to be true, and this has to be true, and you keep just extrapolating out based upon, whatever, and letting it grow organically. That's generally how sorry about that. That's generally how I like to do it. It maximizes player agency. It lets me do the things that I enjoy the most, and makes it so I have to look at the least amount of fantasy maps.
I like the buy-in. I think that's a great idea. That's fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about NPCs in your world. How do you go around crafting them? What's your process?
So I with NPCs, it comes down to a lot of similar things, kind of what I've already talked about. Where with NPCs, I want to make sure that this person is dynamic and fun in some degree and engaging and provides you with multiple routes of engagement generally, especially if it's a major NPC. A minor NPC can kind of be throwaway and is a silly voice, and I just trust. Often if I know I need to have, a longer term NPC or something like that, I will go through, I don't remember where I read this, but I think it's an improv rule of, first and foremost, which is, what does your character want? What is your character's secret? And how does the character want to be seen? And if you can answer those 3 questions, you can improvise freely with the NPC. Sometimes I'll link characters up just to make it a little more fun for me. I might link characters up to a certain like historical figure or certain whatever, thematic idea I like to tie them back into. In the Horror in the Orient Express campaign I've been running, they met a professor who was very explicitly Slavoj Žižek. Okay. So I'm just doing a Slavoj Žižek impression, which kind of works on the material base there. I think one of my players knew who that was, so it was mostly just me doing a lot of very weird behaviors, and them just being like, "Are you on coke?" And me just being like, "No, I swear, like this is a solid B+ of an impression, guys." But yeah, it's a lot of like little stuff like that. I generally don't like, and I try my best to not directly pull. I know some people do. I generally don't like pulling directly from people as much as possible, or from other media. unless it's an intentional joke that I want you to recognize. Most of the time, I try to just quickly answer those three things and then let it organically grow from there. And then as well, allowing player interpretation of those things to kind of define it. So if players think somebody's deeply suspicious, well, they should probably have something that for their suspicions. It might not be, literally they're the big bad evil guy or something, but it might just be, oh, they've actually been gambling on the side and they're super in debt, and now like you picked up on something, but you picked up on the wrong thing, and something that feeds back over. Like I like rewarding intuition and stuff like that. So trying to leave enough space for me to fill in those markers.
Very cool. What advice do you have for GMs who struggle with improvisation?
Um, I think there is. I mean, part of it is just, and this is always like sounds like a horrible piece of advice, but I also did stand up for 5 years and know what it's like to bomb so bad you clear a room multiple times. You will, if you do stand up, you will do that. I would say just keep doing it. Like, just keep trying and keep slowly removing your safety nets of tools. Keep prep a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. Like if you think you probably don't need as much as you think you need. And oftentimes I found the more that you prep, the harder it is to improvise, because you have all this stuff that you want to use. And if you don't have those tools there, you will figure it out. The more you buy for a recipe, the more you feel like you have to cook the recipe. And if you don't have that, you don't have that. It's great. I also think there's a really important improv idea, which is first idea is best idea, where you just have to trust that you're good enough to do this, and your first idea is strong enough that you can elaborate on it. So having a clear focus, a clear intention when you're doing stuff, and then leaning into, like, I said something, I am now accountable to the thing I said, and trying to work away, trusting yourself that you can work it back in. And it just takes practice. It's not oftentimes you have to be comfortable messing up, and sometimes you will need to go, that's not true. I'm sorry, guys. That's not canon. That was so dumb. And your players will go like, yeah, it was. And that's the end of it. I've never had I've had to like rewind stuff where I did like a dumb joke and I'm just like, I don't want that in the world. And I've never had a player go like, no, you got to keep it. Like, I've never had a player be like, I'm so disappointed in you. Like, no, they normally get a laugh out of it, and then we'll go back to whatever it is. As long as you kind of trust yourself there and you stay committed to it, like I think it's just a matter of practicing and doing it.
Cool. Let's pivot again. Now we're going to talk about pro GM questions. These are going to be questions that, given the audience for Behind the Grind, this is, for new wannabe GMs and things of the sort. So these are the questions that we kind of collected that, they want to know from veterans like you. So what does the day of a pro GM look like?
Excuse me, pardon me. Yeah. So when I'm DMing on like my normally before I started doing this, which for context, I now go to grad school. But before, thanks to Pro GM. But before I was doing that, I was running probably about 2 to 3 games a day.
Okay.
I have the most unhealthy Puritan work ethic you can possibly have for someone who's not a Puritan. So I was working far harder than I needed to. But I would run 2 games a day, about 3 hours each. I put a lot of work into making sure, because I'm not the biggest D&D person in the world, at least not for like 5th edition.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to put as much. That is where the money is at the end of the day. So I put in a lot of work to make sure that I'm running at least 50% non-D&D, which thankfully helps a hell of a lot in balancing all of that out for me. So it would be a lot of me on Discord calls, just kind of running those games. Occasionally, especially if I'm doing like a big campaign like Horror on the Orient Express. I'm trying to think of other. I've ran a lot of campaigns, so I'm trying to think. But it's weird when you have to think of the names; they all disappear because so many of them sound similar. I'm about to run Dracula Dossier, So like there is the prep work that goes into those that's different, where you have to read through and memorize as much of it as you can. But even that, because of the way I like to do it, I've intentionally designed a way where I'm doing bare minimum of prep work that I can. I normally have a 2 hours break between games. So it'll be, a traditional 8 hour day fundamentally. And thanks to what I do, and because I have to work on other people's schedules, I end up having a pretty late start compared to most people. So oftentimes, like my earliest game on most days is around 2, but that also means that my last game is normally around like, so I work from like 2 to 11 ultimately. Um, the goal is to have 5 days on, 2 days off, but I had some personal stuff that got in the way of that, so I was up to like 7 days on, no days off.
Goodness.
Yeah, it helps that I worked in politics where it was the same thing, but 12-hour days. So it makes it, when I'm like, I'm only working 8 hours a day, that's easy. That's totally fine. I do have some like health issue stuff, which thankfully, like I have like chronic migraines and stuff like that, and I've thankfully gotten very lucky with players where I can communicate that with them, express it. So if I need days off and stuff like that for health reasons, nobody ever gives me any shit about it. It's great. But generally, that'd be what my normal day looks like. Is about like before I started going to grad school, it's about 6 hours a day of games with a 2 hour break in the middle.
Okay. What do you okay, so what can a beginning GM look at as far as expectations on, income for a given week, maybe a month, maybe a year? How fast were you able to build yourself up to be a full-time GM?
Yeah. So to be clear, with my situation in particular, I got on the website very early, all
Okay.
things considered. I think I was either first or second wave of people joining websites, what it seems like looking back. And when I got on the website, the reviews worked very different. So the way reviews worked when I got on the website, which is I think they fixed because of me, is you could leave. You didn't review per GM, you reviewed per session. So I had a couple of games where the players got super, super competitive about leaving reviews and leaving the longest possible review. So I got really, really lucky and just had like within like 2-3 months of me starting on there, had like 60 reviews because it was the same 5 dudes over and over and over trying to top each other. And it just kind of skyrocketed me really fast. So probably within, I was borderline full time within, I want to say like 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
Because, yeah, and it was truly like, you cannot do what I did. Don't try to do what I did. I got stupid lucky. I just happened to have players who liked how I did it and happened to have players who were competitive in this way. And it made my life really, really easy comparatively. For new people, I mean, I think there's two things to keep in mind, which is I think there is a rush to doing it full time that often is the wrong mentality to have, to be honest, because I think you should be starting out. It's going to take a little while to get going, and it's also going to take a little while to get comfortable with it. The most nerve-wracked I've ever been were the first like 50 sessions I ran on Start Playing, where it's like it changes the dynamic of you getting money from somebody, and you have to get comfortable with that, and you have to be able to handle the fact that you're doing all of these games. I'm very lucky since my prep's so low, but if my prep was longer, it'd be very, very difficult to do, especially if I had to do the same games because prep takes so long. So like I would not be able to do it. So I would say like scale up slowly. Do not try to sprint towards full-time work with this. Make sure that you feel comfortable doing, 4 games a week before you try to do, 10 games a week. Like do not just try to race into it because it's much harder than it actually looks. To handle that many competing stories and that many kind of things like that.
Okay, so if we're talking actual income, what are we looking at here? I mean,
oh yeah, so like I say, like I think you should. I think that there is I generally all my games cost about $25 per player, I believe. $25 per player per session. So we're coming out to, I'm assuming I run all of my games now. It's somewhere a little bit. I had to cut my number of games I do in half because of grad school. So I'm making somewhere around like, I think like 1,000 a week, 800 a week, somewhere around there. I when I was doing it like fully, it was closer to like 1,500 a week, somewhere around there, I want to say. So like good stable income.
Absolutely.
Like for my lifestyle. I don't live large. I did start, like, it's 25 now after doing it for 3 years. I think there is a desire to start out at 25, and it's, the question really is, and I don't ever want to diminish anyone's abilities or anything like that, but like, are you ready for that? Like, this is still art. This is professional art that you have to be ready for the consequence of asking for 25 while you're still figuring out how to do it. I think the smart choice generally is to start at like 15 is where I would start at now, which obviously is not going to be livable income, but is like as a part-time side hustle, like that's a reasonable place to start, and then, you know, scale up slowly. Generally don't scale up during campaigns. There's no better way to upset people than in the middle of a campaign they agreed to at a price to go, it costs more now. Like, people hate that. Try your best not to do that. But I think starting somewhere around there, when I started, it was like $5 a session, and I've worked my way up to 25, and I don't really want to go higher if I can help it. And trying to do that, trying to make sure that you're easing your way into the financial accountability that will come from you saying, I am worth $30 a session. Cool. Well, then you better be actually at that level. And if you're not, you're going to put a whole lot of extra stress on you. Or if you are, but you don't know how to fully incorporate it in yet, like, you will get comments that you don't want to deal with. Like, start out, trust yourself, give yourself the space to grow, give yourself there. Start at like 15, work your way slowly up, and trust that like you are a good enough artist where you will be worth it, but you do have to like put in your time.
Very cool. So when you're running these type of games, like a campaign, you know, 10 sessions or whatever it is, stuff like that, do you have a lot of people coming in and out, or is it pretty much so consistently the same people that are seeing this through?
I mostly have people. It normally is, if the group's about 6 people, which I don't like going higher than. Generally, it'll be 4 to 5 people will always stick around. Once you get through the first 3 sessions, which is, I think, where every campaign has the highest fail rate, is if people start dropping out first 3 sessions, your game's not going to work.
Okay.
That's just how I think it's true of home games. I think it's true of whatever. Never skip the first 3 sessions. Those are the ones where games will fail off of. Once I get past that, generally people just stick around. I don't really have a lot of turnover. I don't know if it's part of how just my style, or people just stick around. They're invested to that degree. But once you get through that period, I normally have around 4 of the 6 will be there generally till the end, and maybe, you know, and then normally people are leaving due to scheduling issues, work issues, money issues, whatever. And I often find, especially if it's money issues, of just, you know, giving people space to figure their shit out so they can come back, so they can, you know, play for a few weeks while they resolve it, is oftentimes the better response than just going, you know, no, you're gone because you can't pay. I've done that for a couple of people, especially people who are like facing like financial insecurity or whatever, and I've never had it not work out for me in the long run.
Nice.
Yeah, like, who you're dealing with all this, and I'm gonna go, no, you fun? No, have fun. Like, you need it. You need the break. It's okay. Yeah, that's my general. Yeah, I don't have too much turnover, thankfully. And generally, when campaigns end, approximately the same number of people will stick around for the next one. I don't really bleed too bad between campaigns.
Okay. All right. Do you still have as much fun GMing now as you did when you did it for friends?
Kind of. It depends.
Has there been a change in perspective, I guess?
Yeah, there has been a bit, because it depends on. I find there are games I wouldn't be playing because like D&D is the pinnacle of this, where I don't think there's anything wrong with 5e. I think 5e's completely acceptable as a game. God, that's such mean-spirited mid-praise. But like, I think
Sort
it's
of
fine. I
backhanded
think it's a fine.
compliment.
Yeah, yeah. That is. Thank you guys for giving me the monster manual for free. But I think it's totally like it's just not the game I would be picking to play. I find myself much more willing to play games that I otherwise wouldn't be choosing because of the work element of it. But especially in the games, I'm run like City of Mist, I run Otherscape, I have a Pokemon game tonight, weirdly. Like I run a bunch of weird systems and a bunch of ones that bring me a lot of joy. I run Call of Cthulhu a bunch. And being able to do all of those, I find really, really fun and find really satisfying. And it makes it so while there is a work element, like there is I wouldn't be running certain, as many as maybe any D&D games right now if I could be, but I get to do the things I like and I get to do the other parts so much fun. It kind of makes those kind of shine a little bit more. Being able to get into the weird philosophy and history in a Call of Cthulhu game because my players are all completely down with being like leaning heavily into politics and leaning heavily into like cultures and I can describe architecture and like the weird history of it and all that kind of stuff in those games feels a lot more special because I know that I don't get to do that some of the time. So I prioritize games in a little bit of a different way than I would otherwise, but I love that. I also find it really fun. I don't think I've ever had a home game finish. I can't think of a home game that I actually made it to the end of the campaign, to be totally honest. I can think of paid games finish often, which is like once you get past a certain point, you will finish that campaign. And that is lovely, is to be able to get to the end and get people in that emotional, like get people to have the satisfaction of playing for, a year and 2 years, sometimes 3 years. And they get that whole journey. Like that's cool. And that's really, really fun. Being able to know that silver linings there is really satisfying. So that's a very long rambling answer, but that's generally like there's
actually it was on target, man. It was good. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, so you talked about how you write your games is different than many of the other people do play. Generally speaking, with your players' expectations, are they okay with this? I mean, obviously they are if they're going to be sticking in as long as they have. But what do you see are your players' expectations when they play in one of your games, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some. I don't make it explicitly clear to the players oftentimes, especially players who haven't played with me before, that, the degree of freewheeling that I am doing, the degree of prep, or lack thereof of prep that I do. Because I play with a lot of people who are newer to the game, and there is an idea of what prep should be that is, I don't think, totally accurate. Like, thanks to, great GMs, to be clear, but thanks to your Matt Mercers, thanks to your Brennan Lee Mulligans, there is the idea of the binder of lore that I should have off to the side, that I should have fully, memorized and all this kind of stuff. And I don't like hide it, but I also don't make a point of being, like, oh, I'm just a silly little guy making up stuff off to the side. Like, I don't make that clear. But generally, I think because they are there to, like, I think all tabletop games are just agency simulators, and it is your relationship to agency that you're exploring in those games. So the fact that agency is the thing that I am prioritizing makes it so when they either eventually figure it out or somehow very surprised when we get to the end that, like, I've made all this up, they had such a fun time, it doesn't matter too much. And my willingness to kind of get into the muck and to talk, like, I do not avoid politics in my games. I don't quite, especially if I'm running Call of Cthulhu or something like that, where I don't know how you could avoid politics in a game that has class as a point you have to spend money in. I don't know how you do that. So, like, being able to engage on these levels and doing all that kind of stuff, I think the worlds feel so fleshed out that I don't run into that problem too much. I had one game where the players loved talking about the economic models of the places they were in. Like, weirdly, the players were super into economics. So, and it was a group of friends. So whenever they go to a place, they try to find out how the economy works. So I'd have to improvise economic system. Like, I would have, and I can do that because I'm huge nerd who reads theory. So we would do that, and if I messed anything up, they would notice. And then now that mess up is a part of the world, and it feels intentional and all this. And at the end of that campaign, one of the players went, and I thought it would have been clear that like I'm just, I am creating this with you just as much. One of the players went, "Oh, where's the module for this so I can read where you came up read this?" And I was like, "I don't the wiki." Like there is no place to read this. This was all off of you guys. And there was an very quiet like, "Oh wow, like I had no idea. I would not have guessed." And I'm just like, you guys just kept feeding me stuff, so I don't have to. I don't they didn't seem disappointed. They seemed legitimately positively surprised. And I often think it makes the players, if they do know, feel more comfortable making choices because they know that there is no wrong choice.
Okay.
And I think that's a scary thing for a lot of players too, is that fear of like, am I doing the right thing? It's like, you're always doing the right thing in my game. As long as you were choosing something and you're not like, murder hoboing, like,
Yep.
yeah, you are making the right choice in my game.
Very cool. All right, so let's talk about the role of the online TTRPG community.
Yeah.
How has the rise of actual play content and streaming impacted the way you approach game mastering? Has it impacted your way of doing game mastering?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has. I know. I mean, I've cited them, a couple of them throughout. I think it has. It's introduced me to some systems that I really like. That's how I found out about Kids on Brooms, which is legitimately maybe my favorite game. My favorite game. It's one of them at the very least. I think the biggest thing it did is it made it so, like I just mentioned, I'm a bit of a theory nerd. I love reading politics and reading all this kind of stuff. And it made it so the theory world of tabletop games became something kind of accessible to me that it hadn't been before, where it's just me making up ideas and trying to come up with it on my own. And being able to hear other GMs talk about, like the world's best GMs talk about, like, well, this is how I go about this process, and being able to extrapolate ideas out of that was very useful. I mean, the core idea I have, as I said earlier, comes from an interview with Matt Mercer and Brendan Lee Mulligan.
Mm-hmm.
There are specific things I pull out of their styles that I use. I think the person I pull the heaviest from, because I think she plays the closest to how I play, is like a Bria Iyengar, who is an absolute brilliant GM, just absolutely amazing. But the way that she plays feels very similar to how I play, at least from the outside. So I know I've watched how she does it and kind of been like, oh, I love this little thing and I love this little technique, and like pulling very minor stuff like that. I try my best not to do anything ever word for word or like that. That being said, a lot of players really have, because so many people got into the game through Critical Role. The joy a table gets when you just go, how do you want to do this? I mean, it just lands every time. Like there is no better phrasing of it than how do you want to do that? So I do use that phrase because that everybody loves it. Everybody loves it in D&D.
Very cool. How do you feel about the responsibility of representing diversity and inclusion in your games?
Oh, I think it's super important.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a very political person. I'm a very I'm a very art oriented person as well. I'm very acutely aware of all of that kind of stuff. So I often lean into trying to create all of that in the world as much as possible. Whether it be through NPCs, whether it be through allowing players a chance to like explore elements of themselves. I had a player in one of my games who came out as trans midway through the game, and then had their character transition in game with them, like so matched up pacing wise. And her coming out as trans was one thing, but then having and everybody being supportive, but having the other players in the game, the other characters in the game, be like actively supportive of her character doing it as well. And you had these two levels of support that was just really beautiful. Like it was a really magical thing that I'm very appreciative I got to be a part of. So trying to create spaces where people feel comfortable doing that is really important. And I also think on the other side of not pretending that the world is kind is also very important. Like when I run Call of Cthulhu, I lean into the fact that it's like there are, if we're doing a game in the 1920s and 30s, like, you have to deal with the rise of fascism.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is just as important as you guys having to fight against this and making it so you are aware of the way systems of like oppression are there and engage with, I think is like the flip side of that coin that should also be there. So allowing you to be, I had one player actually tell me that I helped teach their husband who was playing in the game as well, how systemic racism worked through a Call of Cthulhu game, of just making sure that I mechanized the process of how does this look? Like, every time they would go to a hotel, one of them was playing a black character, make you roll for it. Like, are you going to be allowed in? Will a taxi stop for you? All of these small things that you do not think about, and making it so you experience that there is just as much a matter of the inclusivity question. And making sure your players are comfortable with all of these things too. Like making sure this full tableau is capable and able to be in the space. At least that's my approach to it. I know there are some people who don't like engaging with that side of stuff. I very much do, and I very much like making it as fully faceted a picture, so you get to be both empowered through your choices and then empowered through your resistance. Okay. I think those both are the same thing to me.
All right, this will be the last question that I've got for you. Yeah. But what advice would you have for an aspiring GM looking to make a name for themselves online?
Yeah, I would say be very much yourself. Be very bold with what you want to do, and believe in your voice. Like, if you make choices, that you will make choices nobody else will make, and the more you make those choices, the more you will find the people that actually want to play you. Just, there's a reason you want to tell stories. Lean into that. That will be the place that you find your most active, supportive player base, much more than if you try to be anybody else. Like, that's the thing that I always found the most satisfying for me, and that's the thing that I think allows me to do it the way I do. I do not play the game how other people play the game, and I don't want to play the game the way other people play the game.
I say, with 1,700 games under your belt, that carries a lot of weight. So that's awesome. Listen, take a little bit of time. Talk to us about some of the projects you got going on. Is there anything you want to promote? Anything you want to talk about? Any shout-outs you want to give?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. So I always have new games launching generally, so keep your eyes open on my Start Playing. I'm Jack Weasel look at my full name, or Jack Weasel is the name I use on Start Playing.
When we post this thing, I'll make sure on the bottom I have all the links that you want me to have.
Hell yeah, awesome.
It'd be great.
Thank you. I'm going to be doing a variety show over the summer. We're still finalizing details on it, but I'm going to be doing a live variety show. So if you're in New York, come see. That's going to be Sugar and Salt is our performer names, so keep your eyes open for that. I trying to think. I have a friend of mine does amazing maps, so I will. Oh God, he's gonna be so angry. I don't remember his map name. There will be a link in the description.
Yes,
you will find it. I promise. Tyler, I love you. Please don't kill me. Your wedding was great. Thank you for letting me come. I would, and just keep your. And I do have, if you go on Spotify, on any of those tools, you should be able to see I had a show I did for a while called In the Land of Cheese and Sauce, which is a Taco Bell themed D&D world that you can absolutely give a listen to, that I am still deeply proud of and excited by. So those are the big things I can think to promote right now. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, guys and gals. I want to thank y'all for plugging in, and thank you, Jacob, so much for taking time out of your day to visit with us. There's a lot of great insight here. I think that people can definitely benefit from. I know I have. So, but. Guys and gals out there, if you enjoy this content, make sure that you guys cast the triple boon, like, share, and subscribe. Talk to aid in our quest, but also we enjoy conversations. So, on the bottom there with comments, let us know what you think. If you got questions for Jacob, clarification, want him to unpack and expand on some of the things he was talking about, because there's a lot of really good concepts there. I think that time limiting that we couldn't go into, but it'd be worth exploring. But like I said, guys, we want to be able to give you guys what you want. So give us some good questions, give us some good feedback. Just get engaged, guys. So let's hear it. So, all right, Jacob, again, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and guys and gals, we're going to sign off here. Thank you so much. God bless.